First of all, ICANN is very thrilled, I have to say, to continue to collaborate with CTU, particularly in activities related to capacity building, because it is through capacity building that we can get more of you involved in the important work of policy development in the sphere of internet governance. Because if we attempt to get you involved without first explaining what this whole area is all about, then we would not be as effective as if you are fully aware of all the various aspects and dimensions of what it is we're trying to accomplish. I'm also very happy to be back in Suriname. Maybe Carlton might remember the last time I was here, which was some time ago, and I apologize to Wendy for taking so long before coming back. It's not because Suriname is not a nice place. On the contrary, I mean, I had some very enjoyable experiences in Suriname, and I don't know why it is that I took so long before coming back. But nevertheless, thanks to the CTU, I'm here, Gary, and I'm happy to be here. So I think in this presentation, what I'm going to attempt to do is perhaps kill two birds with one stone. First of all, explain a little bit about ICANN, and Nigel has done half of my work for me, so that's good. Thank you, Nigel. I'll just, cover one or two topics. But more importantly, what I'd like to do is to explain how policy is developed within the ICANN community, within the ICANN multi-stakeholder community, because we take a multi-stakeholder approach, and Secretary General used the word multi-stakeholder twice in her remarks. Nigel used it 3 times. Nigel even spoke about IG actors who are multi-stakeholder actors as well. So this whole approach that we take, this multi-stakeholder approach, is one that has proven to be over time more and more appropriate to the type of work we are doing. And ICANN as an organization and as a community is a very good example, at least in my opinion, of how this multi-stakeholder model works. So in the presentation, I will be incorporating aspects of how we utilize the multi-stakeholder model, along with explaining how ICANN actually works. So we will be looking at ICANN, we'll be looking at the ICANN ecosystem, we'll be talking about something called non-com, and feel free to throw something at me if I throw acronyms at you like the GAC and the CCTLDs and so on. Anytime I say one of those terms without explaining what it is, just shoot your hand up and I will stop and explain. Yes, Jacqueline, you can throw the sweets at me. I used to play cricket. I think I can catch one or two. But the whole idea is that we use, as Nigel said, many acronyms only because it's easier to use the acronyms rather than say things like Governmental Advisory Committee in every sentence. So forgive us, but we will try to explain what all of these acronyms mean. So here's the first one, non-com. We'll get to that. We would look, of course, at policy development, the way policy is developed in ICANN, and then we'll take a look at some of the mechanisms within the ICANN community that are meant to ensure that the organization is not captured, that no particular individual or entity has undue influence on the policy development processes. So we look at accountability mechanisms, and we will look at reviews. So what is ICANN? ICANN is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, and essentially we manage, as you heard from Nigel, the IP addresses and the domain names that allow you to use the internet for economic development, for social activities, and for business, and all of the other things that we do on the internet these days. And we do that by working with our partners. And ICANN has 2 types of partners. Some of our technical partners are listed here, like the regional internet registries, who give out the numbers globally that Nigel referred to, Afrinic, ARIN, LACNIC, APNIC, and so on. We also work with standards bodies, the IEEE and the ISO root server operators, World Wide Web Consortium, and several others. And as we go on talking about internet and internet governance, you will see that we use the term ecosystem often because there are several actors, several players who each have a specific role, who all work together to ensure that we have a secure, stable, and resilient internet. We have other types of partners that we work with as well. The World Intellectual Property Organization, the UNESCO, the OECD, and Anti-Phishing Group, and several others. So it's not only technical partners that we work with, but we work with other types of partners at ICANN. Now, I think maybe the clicker needs new batteries. Okay. So ICANN's mission is to ensure the secure, stable, and the open operations of the Internet's unique system of identifiers, the names and the numbers. ICANN has a very narrow focus, and that is where we direct most of our attention. So when it comes to internet governance, generally, as multiple stakeholders, you would also have multiple interests. But ICANN does not necessarily get involved in every single aspect of governance related to the internet. For example, you will likely not hear myself or any other member of ICANN staff talk about the regulation of content on the internet, because that is not one of the areas that falls within ICANN's mandate. You will hear us talking a lot about the DNSSEC, security related to the DNS, because those are our areas of focus. So we coordinate the allocation and assignment of names in the root zone of the DNS, and we also coordinate the development and implementation of policies surrounding domain names. A lot of policy development takes place. DNS root server operations, IP address allocation are also areas that ICANN focuses a lot on. Now, when you look at our core values, the values that drive and characterize the way in which we do our work, you would see that we employ an open, transparent, and bottoms-up multi-stakeholder policy development process. All of the work that ICANN does is done using this multi-stakeholder approach. That word again. And Bernadette did indicate that we should not feel we are in school, although she did say at the beginning that we are in school. And what would school be without tests and examination? So there will be a test at the end of my presentation. And, hard work doesn't come without reward. So there is a reward here, for when that test comes, if anybody can answer the questions correctly. But we're talking about multi-stakeholder policy development. Gary, is this sabotage? So within ICANN, we need to understand our internal ecosystem. There is an external ecosystem of the internet globally, but within ICANN, we have our own internal ecosystem, which comprises three parts: the ICANN community, the ICANN board, and the ICANN organization. And we will look individually at each of these components of the ICANN ecosystem, but understand that the most important component of the ICANN ecosystem is the ICANN multi-stakeholder community. You, individuals from government, individuals who are end users, individuals representing commercial entities, representatives of academia, and so on, the multi-stakeholder community. So first of all, if we look at the ICANN multi-stakeholder community, we see that it is a volunteer-based open collection of global stakeholders who work together to develop policy. And they do so by making policy recommendations, conducting reviews, and proposing implementation of that policy. All of this being done in a bottom-up process, and that is very important. So the policies that are developed on issues related to governance within ICANN are not determined by the ICANN staff. They are not determined by the ICANN board, but rather they're determined by you, the ICANN multi-stakeholder community. And in a few slides later on, when we look at the actual steps that are involved in multi-stakeholder policy development, you will see that the process actually starts with you. And this is why you need to understand what is going on so that you can then be well-informed and in a position to propose policy that will positively impact the governance that we are trying to do. Gary, I'm really struggling with the clicker. So maybe you can just advance the slides for me. Next slide. Good. So within ICANN, we have two branches, as it were, which contribute to policy development. And here come the acronyms. One of those branches is referred to as the SOs, the supporting organization. And Jacqueline is smiling because Jacqueline is one of those who has been in the ICANN process from the early days. And if there's any question that I can't answer, I'll pass it on to her and she will be able to answer it, or her colleague sitting next to her, Carlton Samuels. So the supporting organizations develop policy and steward the process, and the ACs, the advisory committees, actually provide advice at various stages of the multi-stakeholder policy development process. Good, I can answer that question and I can respond to that. It's coming up in a few slides. Thanks, Jackie. Good, here you go, here's the slide. See, can we go back? Okay, I'm gonna stop. You go back, this one. Okay, so here's the answer to your question, Jacqueline. So there are three supporting organizations in ICANN community responsible for developing policy recommendations in the areas that they represent. And on the other hand, so the supporting organizations actually have the responsibility for developing the policy in answer to Jacqueline's questions, but the advisory committees, on the other hand, actually give advice during the policy development process that is driven by the supporting organizations. And I'm sure we can have, further explanation and exchange on that, at the end, because I see Jacqueline waiting to exhale or explode. I don't know which of the two it is. Processes, exactly. Now, as we go on in this particular presentation, I actually removed the drill down slides for each supporting organization and each advisory committee as it relates to policy, because while generally there is a sort of standard approach to policy development, these three supporting organizations within ICANN have a little uniqueness in the way they go about developing policy, but we can always talk about that later on. But with regard to the supporting organizations, going back to ICANN's mission and function, remember we deal with numbers and domain names, and then there are two types of domain names. There are the generic domain names like the .coms, the .orgs, the .hotels, .perfume, and so on. And then there are the country code top-level domain names like .sr for Suriname, .tt for Trinidad and Tobago, .bb for Barbados, .lc for St. Lucia, and so on. So those two types of names have their own representative structures within the ICANN community. And the supporting organizations for those two structures have their unique approach to developing policy, as does the address supporting organization within ICANN. Now, Nigel mentioned something referred to as the NRO, the Number Resources Organizations, which is essentially the grouping of the 5 regional internet registries that set numbers policy globally. And at this stage, suffice it to say that NRO and ASO can be used interchangeably. Now, when we go to the advisory committee, there's an important element of the multi-stakeholder process that actually comes out. The whole issue of representation. And what you would notice from the advisory committees is that you have specialized representation, for example, of the governments of the world. Just this morning, I was having a discussion with Wendy asking who is Suriname's new GAC representative, because within the ICANN multi-stakeholder community, there is a place for representatives of the governments of the world. And each government of the world has the opportunity to identify an official representative to take their country's position to feature in the discussions that are going on amongst governments within the ICANN community, so that when policy is developed within ICANN, it has the input coming from the governments of the world. So similarly, there are other advisory committees like the ICANN at large. We refer to that one as ALAC, and essentially at large represents the views and the concerns and the interests of end users. At the end of the chain, the most important people, those who actually use the internet. And then you have interests of those operating the root zone of the internet, where the top level domains are housed. So there are representatives from the root server system advisory committee who give input and advice. And also you have representatives of the security community who give advice on ICANN policy. So these are some of the stakeholders, but the overall intent of the ICANN community is that every stakeholder should be able to find their place somewhere within this overall structure. Now, if you do not immediately see the place that you fit in, have no fear. Because as I said, entities like the GNSO, for example, the Generic Name Supporting Organization, have several layers where you have non-commercial users, commercial users, intellectual property constituency, business constituency, and so on, where you can drill down and eventually find the place where you fit in, regardless of what type of stakeholder you actually are. So that generally is the ICANN multi-stakeholder community. And then we get to the ICANN board. And these colors are very deliberate. We'll see that in another slide. Even the icons that you see here are very deliberate as well. But the key point that I want you to take away from this particular slide is that the ICANN board itself is a multi-stakeholder board comprised of individuals from the various stakeholder groups. But one interesting thing about the way the ICANN board functions is that once you become an ICANN board member, and I encourage any one of you who feel you have a contribution to make as an ICANN board member to go through the process for trying to become a board member. You are all eligible. But the interesting thing about becoming an ICANN board member is once you become a board member, you essentially no longer necessarily represent the constituency that you came from, but rather you represent the interests of the global internet community. You bring your knowledge, you bring your experiences from whence you came, but you now take a slightly different perspective of not that particular constituency, but rather the greater good of the internet overall. And the board is a very interesting place at ICANN. I'll just leave it at that. I'll try to change the slide again. Next slide, Gary. Good. So in accordance with ICANN bylaws, the ICANN board approves the policy, and then the policy is developed by the ICANN multi-stakeholder community, and then instructs the ICANN organization, the staff, to execute management based on those policies. The board acts by resolution, and information on decisions and meetings and all of the interactions of the board is completely transparent. And coming from, the private sector with interactions with government, I think I can safely say that ICANN is perhaps one of the most transparent international organizations that I've ever seen. Perhaps maybe too transparent. I mean, you can literally, see the complete transcripts of conference calls and meetings and minutes, resolutions and so on, going back several years. Because it is felt within the ICANN Multi-Stakeholder Organization that it's important that new persons coming in a position to understand what has gone on historically, so they can quickly, comprehend the issues in order to make active and substantive inputs on new policy. Next slide. So this is another look at the board and why we have the different colors and why we have these different icons in here. So by looking as we go around the board members, we can see that the whole characteristic of the multi-stakeholder nature of the ICANN community is actually represented on the board. So the board is not necessarily just this high office of kings and queens and politicians and prime ministers who decide what happens with governments, but rather it is individuals like you and me who come from different backgrounds, who are in a position then finally to work together to approve policy that the community itself develops. So you have representatives of the supporting organizations, 2 from each, 2 from the address supporting organization, 2 from the country code supporting organization, 2 from the generic name supporting organization. And this ties directly back into those slides that I had previously. On the other side, when it comes to the advisory committee, you have representatives of the end users, you have a representative of the governments, the root server system, the security, and of course you have the ICANN president and CEO. Nigel mentioned the Internet Engineering Task Force, and the IETF also has an appointee to the ICANN board. Now these orange board members at the bottom here, the 8 of them, are a little bit different to the ones that are appointed by the SOs and the ACs, because they are appointed by something called the non-com. Remember that acronym that I had? So Jackie, go ahead, you can throw the suite at me if you want to. And I will talk a little bit about what the non-com is and why these are important. But generally, the non-com creates a situation where you can have nominees to the board who don't necessarily come from any one of these constituencies, supporting organizations or advisory committees, but nominees who are simply good persons, qualified persons, experienced persons who would do a good job on the ICANN board. So those essentially are nominated by the non-com. Now, talking a little bit more about the board, here are some interesting key facts. This is not going to be in the test at the end, or maybe I should put it in the test at the end. But one of the aspects of the board is that ICANN tries to incorporate diversity, and in particular, geographic diversity, linguistic diversity, gender diversity, because the board is supposed to be truly multi-stakeholder, representative of the multi-stakeholder community. And the nominating committee is responsible, as we said, for appointing several members of the community to the board directly. There's voting, and the board operates by discussions, through discussions of all board members, but only those who have voting rights are actually able to vote on policy finally. And as I said, there are very serious steps taken with regard to transparency. So board members and directors and liaisons are annually expected to disclose all business and affiliations that in any way relate to ICANN. I was joking with Gary. I don't know why he didn't believe me, but I explained to Gary that last night I actually stayed up until 4 a.m. because the first call that I got was from a friend telling me that the Netflix wasn't working in Grenada. So I spent 2 hours trying to work that out, and then I got an email saying that an anti-bribery and money laundering internal training, which as an ICANN staff member, I am compelled to take and comply with was actually due today. So I had to make sure that I did that training last night because all ICANN staff members are expected to be completely familiar with anything that could possibly compromise the way in which we do our work. And you, if you were interested, would be able to go online and check to see, okay, are all of the ICANN staff members disclosing their affiliations? Does Albert Daniels have any shares in anything related to a top-level domain or anything like that? Because it is felt that the work of ICANN is so important that no one should be able to unduly influence the policies that we come up with, which may or may not adversely affect you, the end user. So those are some key facts. And then you have, the less important part of the ICANN ecosystem, the ICANN organization, people like me, your servants, the ICANN staff, and we are currently just about 340, and our role is simple as staff members within the organization. We do what our boss says, the president and CEO of ICANN, and he does what the ICANN board says, and we facilitate your work in policy development. We organize the meetings, we develop fellowship programs so you can go to these meetings and bring the input from your neck of the woods. We ensure that there is capacity development. We attend events like this to help you understand what the multi-stakeholder policy development process is all about. There are policy staff who are designated to help with the policy work, putting the working groups together, keeping the minutes, collecting the community input, and ensuring that the process flows smoothly. So that is the ICANN organization. Next slide, Gary. And the ICANN organization is a global, not-for-profit organization. When people ask me where I live, I tell them Caribbean Airlines, American Airlines, God forbid, Liat. And it's true. We spend, most of us, particularly those of us with GSC, the Global Stakeholder Engagement Team, and it's not just ICANN. I mean, you have a similar situation with ISOC. My good friend, Shannon Osepa from ISOC, we meet most regularly at MIA, Miami International Airport, because either, I'm going back home and he's going somewhere, and we see each other in the departure lounge or at the lounge at D30 or going, cross purposes. So we travel a lot because the whole idea is we want to be able to reach you. And as Bernadette said, we want to be able to engage you in a multi-stakeholder way, because I can't stay in one location and really truly understand the needs of stakeholders here in Suriname. So the ICANN organization is spread globally, and the places where we don't have offices and engagement centers, we try to travel to from time to time. And we have this in the Caribbean, very interesting means of transportation called LIAT, L-I-A-T. And at the cocktail this evening, if you come to me, I'll explain to you what that acronym stands for. It is supposed to stand for Leeward Islands International Air Transportation, and that is the official name, but we can talk at the cocktail. So the NONCOM. NONCOM is short for Nominating Committee. Next slide. And the nominating committee itself is multi-stakeholder. And part of the work of the nominating committee is meant to ensure the avoidance of capture. So it's responsible for appointing a number of seats to the ICANN Board of Directors, 8 seats, and the at-large community, and also to the councils of those different areas within ICANN. So within ICANN, you have the at-large. Within ICANN, you have the CCNSO. Within ICANN, you have the GNSO. So you have these little boxes, and in those boxes, you also have leadership structures. So the NONCOM also appoints seats to those leadership structures within those sub-constituencies within ICANN. Again, for the primary reason of ensuring that there's the avoidance of capture and you don't have any particular entity dominating what's happening within those particular constituencies. I think I missed a slide. Can we go back one slide, please? So the non-com itself consists of 15 voting delegates, along with a number of leaders from the community. And the whole idea, again, is that once they leave their constituency, they're not necessarily accountable to that constituency for the decisions that they make with regard to nominations, but rather they are accountable to the global multi-stakeholder internet community. Next slide. And then if you look at the composition of the non-com itself, again, you see a reflection of all of those different parts of ICANN that I have already spoke about. So at various layers, at various levels, there is an effort to preserve the multi-stakeholder nature of the ICANN community by ensuring that all of the different stakeholder groups have their say. And remember I told you that the JNSO has different types of stakeholders. So here are some of those stakeholders: the registries, the registrar stakeholder group, business users, constituency, the non-commercial stakeholders, internet service providers, intellectual property. So again, regardless of which constituency you come from, there's the opportunity to participate in policy development. So this is the one slide that I'd like you to really understand fully. The test is on this slide. So this is the crux. You have those SOs that I spoke about, the numbers people, the country code people, the generic names people, and you have the advisory committees, governmental advisory committee, the end users, security, and root servers. And these, as we said, are the three SOs that develop the policy, and then you have the advisory committees giving advice at various stages of policy development. So how does a policy get developed? It starts by identifying the scope of the issue. You, the community, within your space, whether it's within the GNSO or the ASO, can come up and suggest that there should be an issue on one of these areas within ICANN's mission. An issue on numbers, an issue on CCTLDs, an issue related to names. That's what ICANN does. ICANN concentrates on numbers, names at the global level and at the country code level. So one of these supporting organizations can come up and identify an issue, and the supporting organization produces an issue report which actually starts the policy development process. That issues report will say several things. And people in the room have had, experience with developing these issues reports. Is it really a substantive issue? My internet is too slow, my internet is too fast. Is that an issue that ICANN should be developing policy on? Or is that a local issue? So the issues report will specifically go into the details of whether or not the issue that the end user or the entity wants to develop policy on is a substantive issue. And if it is, then it will go through the stage of policy development. And then what happens is that there's a call for volunteers to develop that policy. That entire ICANN multi-stakeholder community, as I mentioned before, is a volunteer community. And there is actually something that we refer to as volunteer burnout, which is why I'm happy to see the familiar faces in the room, but I'm also happy to see new faces, because I can rest assured tell you that these two people, Jacqueline and Carlton, they have been burnt out for several years. They work so hard in internet policy development. I don't know how they do it. And there's another gentleman who I always have to mention from Trinidad called Devanan Tilaksin. How many hours are there in a normal work week? Anybody? 80? 80 to 100 for you. Most of us have a 40-hour work week. You see what I mean? Jacqueline is already saying that her work week, when things are okay, starts with 80 hours in a work week. And Devanan's work week must be 2 or 3 times. 140, there you go. So this is just to indicate that once you start getting involved in this thing, particularly if you are enthusiastic about what you're doing and you want to see it done properly, you could easily find yourself getting very involved. It's like anything that you're interested in. If you're interested, I don't know, in steel pan or in cooking or in working out, you get drawn into it. So the volunteer call goes out, and any one of you in the ICANN community can stand up and say, yes, you know what? I think this issue is important to me in Suriname. I think this issue is important to me in my university, or I think this issue is important to me in my business. I want to be on the policy development working group for that particular issue. And then there's a consultation with the community and the production of the policy. So the working group gets together and they sit and discuss how should the policy be worded, and they come up with a draft. And once that draft is complete, it goes out into what we call the global multi-stakeholder community. You go to the ICANN website and you can see all of these policy documents that are open for comment. You can comment electronically by sending in an email or by commenting in the fora that's available. So the barrier for making your input into the multi-stakeholder policy development process is very low. You really have no excuse for not participating. You simply need to go to the ICANN website, see what is being discussed, and then you can make your input. You can say, I disagree with this, or I feel that this document is incomplete. Or also as important, you can say, I agree with particular issues, because we tend to feel that we should only comment if we feel that something is wrong with a policy. But I can tell you it's just as important to say that you agree with policies, because if you don't say that you agree with policy and there are 100 of you, but one guy who disagrees says that he disagrees, then the mistaken impression would be that there's something wrong with this policy because the only comments that we have are disagreement. So it is just as important for you to comment and say that, yes, I feel this is a good policy, as it is to say that you feel something is missing or that it may not be a good policy. So once this process of community consultation is completed, then the final draft policy goes to the ICANN board that I referred to, and the board has their discussions, and after they've had the discussions, they throw it out to the multi-stakeholder community again for one final call for community input and public comments. And again, you can see what those comments have been. You can see who the comments have come from. And really and truly, the bar for making comments is very, very, very low. All you need is an internet connection, some understanding of what's going on, and some way of communicating what your public comment is. And then finally, the board votes on the policy. And if the policy has been approved, then it gives instructions to our CEO, Yoran Mabi, of ICANN. And Yoran then says to the ICANN staff, go forward and implement this policy because this is what the community wants. Not this is what the board wants, or not this is what the ICANN staff wants. This is what the multi-stakeholder community has decided should be done. And this is the importance and the strength of the whole multi-stakeholder policy development process. Okay, I'll just quickly go back one slide, please. I'll just quickly go through, a specific issue. Right now, there are just over 200 million US dollars that are available in an ICANN bank account somewhere as a result of auctions that were done for new generic top-level domain names. The money is in an ICANN bank account. What happens to that money is going to be decided by you, the ICANN multi-stakeholder community, through one of these policy development processes. That money is referred to as auction proceeds, AP, and this will give you a sort of sense of how the mechanism works. So the first thing that happens as usual is a drafting team prepares a draft charter, and then you have a cross-community working group to develop working methods. Very important. You have your charter. Your charter says, what are you trying to do? Then you have your working methods. How are you planning to do it? And then you have an initial report going out again for public comment. Always within the ICANN multi-stakeholder development process, there is a request for public comment. Then you have the finalization of the report going back for the approval of those different constituency organizations. And of course, finally, the board reviews, the board makes its approval, and then you have, the implementation. Very simply, that was just an example of how the multi-stakeholder approach to policy development happens within the ICANN community. Now, there is a lot of effort given to mechanisms meant to preserve the integrity and objectivity of the ICANN, Gary? Okay, of the ICANN multi-stakeholder policy development process. And this is just, oh my God, we've gone completely now? Right, and this is just a sampling of some of the mechanisms that are in place to ensure that at the various stages of this multi-stakeholder process, you have objectivity, you have transparency, and you don't have any particular interest taking over. There are the ICANN bylaws, there are ways of making complaints, there's a complaints officer, there's an ombudsman. The very process for selecting board members is open and transparent. All of the relationships that individuals on these boards and councils are documented. There are redress mechanisms. The community now, after the transition that Nigel spoke about, is empowered. And very importantly, you have these organizational reviews periodically to ensure that things are working well. So that is just generally, I'll speak with one slide. Can I throw the clicker at Gary? Okay, the reviews. One more slide, please, Gary. Forward. I think Gary is doing this deliberately because of what I said to him this morning. Just joking. So the purpose of the ICANN reviews is to look at how things have worked historically in this multi-stakeholder policy development process. And the intent is to ensure that there is a culture of continuous improvement. We know from our various backgrounds that you can always keep improving the way you do things, regardless of how many times you've done it. So the reviews are meant to ensure that we apply industry best practice, we keep up with business trends, we continue to innovate, and we ensure that the way we are operating fits with our strategic vision and strategic plans. So there are different types of reviews that take place within ICANN. They're very specialized reviews, and Carlton has sat on some of these reviews, the who is for sure. These reviews are mandated by the ICANN bylaws, so we can't just go time after time doing security, for example, within ICANN, and not reviewing the way we handle security. And these specific reviews are actually conducted from members and entities from within the ICANN multi-stakeholder community. But then we get to the organizational reviews of the different parts itself, themselves of ICANN. For example, the way the non-com selects persons to the board, the way the CCNSO, the GNSO, and the ASO do their work. And those reviews are also mandated by the ICANN bylaws, but the difference is that these reviews, the organizational reviews, are conducted by independent reviewers, individuals and entities that are independent of ICANN itself. And those reviews are published. Everybody can see what the reviewers found, and everybody can comment on the points that the reviewers found. So this is basically it. I'll just show you this slide one last time to show the process, identifying the issues, calling for volunteers, developing the policy, consultation with the community, then goes to the board, board consultation, consulting with the community again, then a vote, implementation by the ICANN staff. Now, there's a lot to learn, and I pretty much scraped the surface, right? But you can always go to learn.icann.org and approach any ICANN staff member for further information. because we would be more than happy to continue to work with you to ensure that every individual has the opportunity to contribute to ICANN policy. So there's one question, and there's certain people who are not allowed to answer. And if you answer, you get this jump drive with a lot of important information on it. What does the GNSO stand for? GNSO. And if you don't answer, I get to keep this and maybe ask you an easier question later on. GNSO. Going once, going twice, going into my pocket. I will ask an easier question later on. No, Jackie, I'll keep it. Nobody in that rocket. I'll put it on the desk.
Yes.
And I'll come up with an easier question. Is it answer?
Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's thank Albert for his presentation, please. So Albert had an inducement to get a response from the audience, but I didn't have any. So what I will do is we'll take some time to interact with you shortly, but we are running a little late. So I'll ask that we take the break now and try to come back for 11 o'clock. And when we come back, we'll interact with you a little bit and take the other presentations on the agenda. Thank you. So break is right outside. Restrooms are also right outside. So please keep an eye on the time.